Time now for business, and for that I'm joined by business editor Stephen Carroll. And hello, Stephen.
Hi,
You're starting with news of major job cuts at the HSBC.
That's right, 35,000 jobs are to go at the bank over the next 3 years. That's 15% of its global workforce. This as the lender implements a radical downsizing, shedding $100 billion in assets and refocusing its business on Asia. Last year, profits at HSBC slumped by a third. Shares in the bank have plunged by 6% in London today on the news. Catherine Viette has the details.
Plunging profits and deep job cuts at HSBC as the banking giant radically overhauls its business. HSBC said its pre-tax profit fell 33% to just over $13 billion last year, compared to nearly $20 billion in 2018. It blamed the plunge in profits on a big write-off related to its investment in commercial banking teams in Europe.
Our immediate aims are to increase returns, create the capacity to invest in the future and build a platform for sustainable growth.
As part of its restructuring efforts, HSBC says it plans to cut around 35,000 jobs, reducing its headcount to 200,000 over the next 3 years. That would slash its global workforce by about 15%. The UK-based bank is also planning to shift more of its focus to Asia, where it makes most of its money. To do that, HSBC says it will scale back its trading and investment banking operations in Europe and close around 30% of its bank branches in the US. These measures are hoped to reduce costs by $4.5 billion. Complicating HSBC's efforts, low global interest rates, the protests in Hong Kong, and the coronavirus outbreak, which have caused disruptions to its operations. After shedding around 2% of its workers starting in August of 2019, this will be the bank's second overhaul in 2 years as it tries to boost its profitability.
Shareholders in the carmaker Nissan have been venting their anger over the company's performance at a meeting in Tokyo. They complained of nosediving sales at the company and the damage to the brand's reputation since the arrest of its former chairman, Carlos Ghosn. The new chief executive, Makoto Uchida, apologised for having, quote, allowed the misconduct of Ghosn and promised that a turnaround plan to improve the company's finances would be announced in May. Staying with the motor industry, there was a slump in new car registrations in the European Union in January as car makers struggle with new emissions regulations. Overall, sales slumped by 7.4% for the month, but the fall was even steeper in France, down 13%. French car makers Renault and Peugeot both saw their sales suffer. Renault's were down 16%. That company only last week announcing annual losses of more than €140 million for 2019. The French finance minister has warned that the government will be vigilant about any steps which might lead to job losses at the company. Apple has warned that the supply of iPhones will be limited because of the coronavirus outbreak in China. The technology giant says its earnings for the first 3 months of this year will be lower than previously expected. That's a huge knock from the company, which has seen its supply chain and consumer demand hit because of the virus.
A warning from Apple, as the tech giant says that disruptions caused by the coronavirus will impact its finances.
Work is starting to resume around the country, but we are experiencing a slower return to normal conditions than we had anticipated. As a result, we do not expect to meet the revenue guidance we provided for the March quarter.
The U.S. tech giant had a strong last 3 months of 2019 and was forecasting between $63 to $67 billion in revenue for its second quarter. The range already an attempt to anticipate the impact from the virus. Apple makes most of its iPhones in China, and its factories there have seen production delays.
These iPhone supply shortages will temporarily affect revenues worldwide.
China is also the third largest retail market for those phones after the U.S. and Europe. But with many of its 42 retail stores in the country still closed or operating at reduced hours, Apple says its sales will be lower than anticipated. Last quarter, China accounted for 15% of Apple's revenue, or nearly $14 billion. China remains the world's biggest market for smartphones. Some analysts now say the virus may cut demand for the devices in the country by half into the first 3 months of the year.
Well, lots happening out there for the markets to chew over in trading today. The Apple news really giving investors a shock earlier on in Asia and feeding into European trading today. Technology shares are one of those sectors seeing falls in Europe. Apple suppliers seeing their shares tumble. Apple has a share listing in Germany that's down over 3%. The company's shares expected to tumble when they open on Wall Street later today. That's the picture on the European markets a short time ago. London's FTSE 100 down by 1%. Now, the Intercontinental Hotel Group, saw its earnings tumble over the protests in Hong Kong. IHG, which also operates the Holiday Inn and Crowne Plaza brands, says revenues in the city fell by 2/3 at the end of last year. Overall turnover at the company down 27%. The firm didn't give any guidance on the impact of the coronavirus, but it does operate more than 440 hotels in China. And finally, from me, the world's richest man is to spend $10 billion fighting climate change. Amazon founder Jeff Bezos says he'll start giving money to scientists, activists and non-profit organisations working to preserve and protect the Earth. Bezos is estimated to be worth around $130 billion. This announcement coming, though, as Amazon has faced fierce criticism both internally and externally for its carbon footprint, using fossil fuels to deliver billions of items around the world. Just last month, hundreds of employees at Amazon signed a letter attacking the company's progress on reducing its emissions. Lots of people wondering if this announcement was very carefully timed from Jeff Bezos.
Yes, indeed. But I'd just be curious to know, does that mean all our Amazon books are going to come by cargo ship or catamaran?
Well, they do have a plan now to reduce their carbon footprint and to go fully renewable, but I think it's 2030, so they're working on it.
We'll see. Thanks for that. That's Stephen Carroll with the day's business.